In a quiet village nestled at the edge of the great savannah where the sun danced upon the earth, there lived a young man named Adebayo. His name, meaning, "the crown has come," was fitting, for he was the pride of his village. Tall, handsome, and respected by his peers, Adebayo was a man admired not only for his strength, but for his gentle heart. Yet, beneath his noble exterior, he harbored a struggle few could understand. A struggle with his mother, Madame Falak, a woman whose love was as deep and unyielding as the mighty river that flowed through the village. Adebayo had been born into hardship, raised by a mother who had sacrificed her youth to raise him after his father passed away in the village wars. Madame Folake had been both father and mother to Adebayo, teaching him the ways of the village, instilling within him the values of hard work, respect, and the importance of family. Her sacrifices were vast, and the love she had for her son was known throughout the village. It was said that Adebayo could not take a step without his mother's blessing, and no one dared to question her authority over him. But as he grew older, Adebayo's heart was not filled solely with gratitude for his mother's sacrifices. His heart longed for something more. It longed for companionship, for love, and he had found that in Aminat, a woman as beautiful as the stars themselves. Aminat, with her gentle smile and calm demeanor, had stolen Adebayo's heart the first moment they had met. She was different from the women who had come before her. She respected Adebayo's bond with his mother, yet she saw the limitations of it. She knew that to truly love Adebayo, she would have to win not only his heart, but also the heart of the woman who had raised him. Yet, Aminat feared the day she would have to meet Madame Folak. She had heard the stories of how Madame Folak ruled her son's life with an iron fist, never allowing any woman to get too close. Aminat knew that the love she had for Adebayo might never be enough to overcome the overwhelming presence of his mother. She feared that her relationship with Adebayo would forever remain in the shadows of Madame Folak's watchful eyes. As the days passed, Adebayo could feel the pull of his love for Aminat growing stronger, but so too did the pull of his loyalty to his mother. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, Adebayo made a decision. He would take Aminat to meet his mother. They had been together for some time now, and he could no longer deny the deep feelings he had for her. It was time for Madame Folake to meet the woman who had captured her son's heart. When Adebayo told Aminat of his plan, she hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready to face her," she confessed, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What if she doesn't like me? What if she doesn't think I'm worthy of you?" Adebayo took her hand gently in his. "Don't worry, my love. She may be difficult, but you will see that we belong together. Just trust me." The day came, and as the sun hung low in the sky, they made their way to Adebayo's family compound. It was a grand place, with high walls made of mud and a large courtyard filled with the sound of children playing. The scent of stews and fresh bread filled the air as Adebayo led Aminat to the door. His heart raced as he knocked, knowing that this meeting would shape the future of his relationship. When the door opened, Adebayo's mother stood before them, her tall figure and stern expression commanding respect. Her hair was wrapped in a bright scarf, and her dark eyes pierced through Adebayo as if she were looking right into his soul. She smiled thinly, but there was no warmth in it. "So this is the woman you've chosen?" she asked, her voice steady and sharp. Adebayo nodded, trying to read his mother's expression. He had been prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, his stomach churned with nerves. "Yes, mother, this is Aminat. She is the one I love." Madame Folak's eyes flicked over Aminat, scanning her as though she were a puzzle to be solved. "I see. You must be very special if you've managed to catch Adebayo's eye, she said, her tone laced with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Aminat stepped forward, bowing slightly in respect. I am honored to meet you, Madame Folak. I hope to learn much from you and to prove that I am worthy of your son's love. Madame Folak raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a thin smile. Worthy? We shall see about that. As Adebayo led Aminat into his family's compound, the air grew thick with unspoken tension. The walls of the compound, once familiar to him, now felt foreign. Madame Folak's home had always been a place where Adebayo sought comfort, where the familiar scent of simmering soup and incense told him he was home. But today, it felt as if he were entering a foreign land, one where his mother's authority ruled, and the idea of another woman in his life was met with suspicion. Adebayo's mother stood tall, looking at Aminat with the sharpness of a hawk inspecting its prey. Her gaze swept over Aminat, and for a moment, the room felt cold. She was sizing her up, making calculations that no one else could see. Adebayo, standing between them, felt his heart tighten. This wasn't going to be an easy meeting. Aminat, despite her calm demeanor, couldn't ignore the wave of nervousness washing over her. She had always known this day would come. But facing Madame Folak in person was far more daunting than she had imagined. The stories she had heard about Adebayo's mother had painted a picture of a woman who was as formidable as any goddess, revered, feared, and powerful in ways that transcended the ordinary. Welcome, Aminat, Madame Folak said at last, her voice smooth but carrying an edge. It is a pleasure to finally meet the woman who has managed to catch my son's attention. There was a small smile on her lips, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I trust you've brought with you the virtues of patience, loyalty, and grace, for you will need them in abundance to keep Adebayo by your side. Aminat bowed her head slightly, trying to hide the discomfort she felt. I am honored to meet you, Madame Folak. I've heard so much about you, and I hope that I can live up to your expectations. Madame Folak's eyes narrowed, and she let out a soft laugh. Expectations, child. You are but a young woman, and what do you truly know about expectations? I've raised Adebayo from nothing. He is my son, my blood, and you, Aminat, are a stranger to me. You must prove your worthiness before you can claim a place in his life. Adebayo stepped forward, trying to ease the growing tension. Mother, please. You've heard enough about Aminat. I love her, and that should be enough. But Madame Folak wasn't easily swayed. She turned to him, her gaze as hard as steel. What you feel for her is nothing but a fleeting emotion, Adebayo. Love is more than just a feeling. It's about sacrifice, about loyalty, about ensuring that the one you choose is worthy of your time, your effort, your life. Her words were sharp, like the sound of a knife cutting through the air. And if Aminat is to share your life, she must prove she understands that. Aminat stood silently, feeling the weight of Madame Folak's words. She could feel the walls closing in, the expectations mounting. She wasn't sure how she could prove herself worthy to a woman who had so much power over Adebayo, a woman who seemed to believe that love was a transaction, a series of sacrifices and tests. But despite the sting of Madame Folak's words, Aminat remained calm. She was no stranger to adversity. Her mother had taught her that love was not just about happiness and joy, but about resilience, about standing firm in the face of hardship. If she were to win Madame Folak's approval, she would need to be strong, but she also needed to be kind. I understand, Madame Folak, Aminat replied softly. I know love requires effort, and I am prepared to prove my commitment, not just to Adebayo, but to you and your family. Madame Folak looked at her with a mixture of amusement and skepticism. Is that so? Well, let's see if you can live up to your words. The conversation shifted to mundane topics, with Madame Folake asking Aminat about her family, her background, and her intentions with Adebayo. Every question seemed designed to test her resolve, to see if she would crack under the pressure. And though Aminat felt the tension rising, she held her ground. She spoke with grace, answering Madame Folake's questions truthfully but carefully. She could feel Adebayo's eyes on her, and his support, though silent, gave her strength. Adebayo, for his part, was torn. He could see the struggle in both women, the mother who had raised him and the woman he hoped to spend his life with. He had hoped that the meeting would go smoothly, that the two most important people in his life would come to understand each other. But as the conversation continued, he could sense the widening gap between them. His mother, though loving in her own way, could not see Aminat as anything other than an outsider. And Aminat, though patient and kind, could not see how to break through the cold walls that Madame Folake had built around her heart. As the day wore on, Adebayo began to feel the pressure of his dual loyalties. He had always known that his mother would be protective of him, but he hadn't anticipated the depth of her resistance to his relationship with Aminat. He had hoped that by introducing them to each other, things would somehow fall into place. But instead, he saw how difficult it would be to win his mother's approval. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the compound, and Madame Folake finally stood up, signaling that it was time for the meal to be prepared. But before she left, she turned to Aminat one last time. I hope you understand what you are getting into, Aminat. Adebayo is not just a man. He is my son, and I will protect him with everything I have. If you're not ready for that responsibility, then you would do well to step aside now. Aminat stood silently for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. But she knew she couldn't step aside. Not now. Not when she had already given so much of her heart to Adebayo. She nodded respectfully to Madame Folake, her voice steady but firm. I am ready, Madame Folake. I will not step aside. As the days passed, following their first meeting, the weight of the encounter between Madame Folake and Aminat hung heavy over Adebayo's home. He could feel the tension every time he saw Aminat. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day, as if his mother's presence had cast a shadow over their relationship. Aminat was more reserved, her smiles less frequent, and her eyes filled with a quiet sadness that Adebayo couldn't ignore. The warmth that had once radiated between them now felt cold and distant. In the evenings, Adebayo would sit with Aminat by the fire, and they would talk about their hopes for the future. He would try to lift her spirits, reminding her that everything would be fine, that eventually his mother would come around. But Aminat could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He was not so sure anymore. The weight of his mother's disapproval was too heavy, and it was wearing him down. Aminat, though she had always been patient and understanding, began to feel a growing unease. She had loved Adebayo from the moment they had met, and she had believed that love could overcome any obstacle. But now, the obstacle seemed insurmountable. Madame Folake was a force to be reckoned with, and her expectations were clear. Any woman who wanted to claim Adebayo's heart would have to prove herself worthy. But how could one prove worth when the very foundation of that love was being tested at every turn? One evening, as they sat by the fire, Aminat could no longer hold her thoughts in. She turned to Adebayo, her voice tinged with sorrow. Adebayo, do you think your mother will ever accept me? Adebayo sighed, his hand running through his hair in frustration. I don't know. I wish I could say she will, but the truth is, she's never allowed anyone else to get close to me. She raised me alone, and in her eyes, no one is good enough for me." "But why Adebayo?" Aminat asked softly. "Why does she feel the need to control everything in your life? You are your own person now. She shouldn't have so much power over you." Adebayo's face darkened, the weight of his mother's influence evident in his eyes. "You don't understand, Aminat. My mother gave up everything for me. She raised me after my father passed away. She worked tirelessly to provide for me, to ensure that I had everything I needed. She sacrificed her happiness, her dreams, so that I could have a better life. In her eyes, I owe her everything. And now, she can't imagine a life where she doesn't have control over every aspect of mine." Aminat looked at him, her heart aching for him. "But Adebayo, you can't keep living for her. You have to live for yourself, for your own happiness. Your life is your own to shape." He shook his head, the struggle evident in his posture. "It's not that simple. You don't understand the pressure she puts on me. It's not just about love. It's about loyalty. She wants to make sure that the woman I choose is worthy of the sacrifices she's made for me." Aminat felt the sting of his words. She knew the weight of sacrifice. Her own mother had made countless sacrifices to ensure that Aminat could have a better life, to provide her with an education and opportunities that were far beyond what most women in their village had. She had learned early on that love required sacrifice, but it also required freedom. The freedom to grow, to make one's own choices, to find happiness without the constant burden of expectation. "I understand sacrifice, Adebayo," Aminat said softly, "but there comes a point where sacrifice becomes control. Your mother has given you life, but that doesn't mean she should control it. You deserve to live your life with the person you choose, not the person she deems worthy of you." Adebayo's gaze softened, but there was still a hint of doubt in his eyes. "I know you're right, Aminat. I want to be with you, but I can't just disregard everything my mother has done for me. It feels like I'm betraying her." Aminat reached for his hand, holding it tightly in hers. "You're not betraying her. You're simply choosing to live your own life. You can still love her, respect her, and honor the sacrifices she made for you. But you also deserve to be happy, Adebayo. And I want to be the one who makes you happy." Adebayo remained silent for a long moment, contemplating her words. The fire crackled in the background, its warmth contrasting with the coldness that seemed to settle in his heart. He knew that Aminat was right. He had spent so much of his life living for his mother that he had forgotten what it meant to live for himself. He had always believed that if he could just please her, if he could just make her proud, everything would be fine. But now he realized that his happiness, his future, was tied to his own choices, not to the expectations of others. The next day, Adebayo decided that he would confront his mother. He could no longer allow her to dictate his every decision. He loved Aminat, and that was enough. It was time to stand up for their love, to fight for the woman who had captured his heart. As he arrived at his mother's compound, the familiar scent of her cooking filled the air, but today it felt different. There was a heaviness in his chest, a sense of finality that hung in the air. Madame Folak greeted him as she always did, with a warm smile and a slight tilt of her head. "How are you, my son?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was an underlying tension in her words. "I'm well, mother," Adebayo replied, his tone serious, "but we need to talk." Madame Folak's expression shifted slightly. "What is it, Adebayo? Is something troubling you?" Adebayo took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's about Aminat," he began. "I've made my choice. She's the woman I want to spend my life with. I love her, and nothing you say can change that." Madame Folaki's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms over her chest. "You're making a mistake, Adebayo. She is not the one for you. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I know exactly what I'm getting into, mother, Adebayo said, his voice steady. I've spent enough of my life living for you. Now it's time for me to live for myself. I'm going to marry Aminat, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. For a long moment, Madame Folake said nothing. Her face was a mask of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also something else. Perhaps it was fear. The fear of losing the one person she had spent so many years protecting. The one person who had been her everything. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. I can't stop you, Adebayo. But you should know that love comes with its own sacrifices. You cannot have everything you want. Adebayo nodded. I know, mother, but I'm ready for those sacrifices. I will stand by Aminat, no matter what. The days after Adebayo's declaration were tense, though he had spoken his truth to Madame Folake. The battle between love and tradition was far from over. His mother had not taken his words lightly. In her own way, she had tried to mask her pain with deflection, refusing to acknowledge the depth of the choice Adebayo had made. She still believed that Adebayo's future was in her hands, and no woman, not even Aminat, could change that. Adebayo, meanwhile, had grown weary of the endless struggle. He had tried for years to please his mother, to fulfill her expectations. But now, he was standing on the edge of something much bigger, the future of his love with Aminat. But each step forward felt like a battle, not just with his mother, but with his own identity, his own sense of belonging. How could he carve out a life of his own when everything he had known was tied to his mother's expectations? Aminat, too, felt the strain. Every interaction with Madame Folak seemed to chip away at her spirit. The older woman's disapproval was palpable, and despite Aminat's efforts to remain strong, she began to question whether she would ever win the heart of the woman who held so much sway over Adebayo. She had hoped that by now, Madame Folak would see the love and respect she had for her son, but, instead, she felt like she was constantly being tested, as if she had to prove herself worthy in the eyes of a woman who would never see her as enough. But the breaking point came on a warm evening when Adebayo received a call from Aminat. Her voice, usually calm and steady, was shaken. Adebayo, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. I need you to come now. Your mother, she's done something. Adebayo's heart sank. He had expected many things, but he had not expected this. He quickly gathered his things and rushed to Aminat's home, his mind racing with possibilities. What had Madame Folak done this time? When he arrived, Aminat was waiting for him at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She stepped aside to let him in, and Adebayo's stomach twisted in knots as he looked around the room, trying to make sense of the situation. Aminat led him to the living room, where there was a note placed delicately on the table. Adebayo picked it up, his hand trembling as he read the words written by his mother's hand. I know you are in love with this girl, but know this, she is not the one for you. You will always regret this decision. She is not worthy of you, and I will not allow you to make such a mistake. I have arranged for someone more fitting, someone who will respect our traditions and our family. You will see in time that I am doing this for your own good. The words stung. Adebayo's fists clenched as his anger surged, but his eyes flickered to Aminat, who was standing across the room, her face a mixture of hurt and disbelief. He could feel the weight of his mother's interference pressing down on him. She had crossed a line this time. Adebayo, Aminat said softly. I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried to be patient, to respect your family, but this is too much. She doesn't even see me. I'm nothing but a shadow in her eyes. How can you expect me to keep going like this? To keep fighting for a place in your life when she keeps pulling me further away? Adebayo swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I never wanted it to be like this, Aminat. I never wanted you to feel like this. I've tried to change things, to make her understand. But she's been in my life for so long. It's like she's the only one who matters. Aminat took a step forward, her hand resting gently on his. But that's just it, Adebayo. She's not the only one who matters. I matter. We matter. For a long moment, Adebayo remained silent, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. He had spent his entire life trying to meet his mother's expectations, to live up to the sacrifices she had made. But now, standing here with Amina, he saw the truth. His mother's love, though powerful, had been suffocating. And for the first time, he wondered if he could truly be free of it. He turned to Aminat, his voice full of resolve. I'm done letting her control my life, Aminat. I've let her hold me back for too long. This is our future now. I will not let her tear us apart. Aminat's eyes softened, but there was still sadness there. And what about her, Adebayo? What about all the years she spent raising you? What about the sacrifices she's made? Adebayo's heart wavered at her words, but the truth was clear. I'll honor her sacrifices, Aminat. I always will. But I can't keep living for her. I have to live for us. The decision had been made. Adebayo knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that Madame Falak would not let go of her son easily. But he had reached his breaking point. No longer would he stand between two worlds, one where his mother's control dominated and one where his love for Aminat could flourish. He would have to face his mother, confront her once and for all, and tell her that his life was his own. Later that evening, he made the decision to go to his mother's house. The sun had set, and the village was quiet, but in Adebayo's heart, a storm was brewing. This would be the moment that everything would change. Madame Falak greeted him with the same composure she always had, but this time, her eyes were guarded. Adebayo did not waste time with pleasantries. Mother, he said, his voice steady but firm, we need to talk. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a direct confrontation. What is it, Adebayo? Have you come to tell me more lies about that girl? Adebayo's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. No, Mother, I've come to tell you the truth. I love Aminat, and I am going to marry her. Nothing you say will change that. Madame Falak's face twisted with anger, her eyes flashing dangerously. You will regret this, Adebayo. You will see how foolish you are. She is not worthy of you, not worthy of our family. I don't care anymore, Mother, Adebayo said, his voice unwavering. I can't keep living my life for you. I've tried for so long to make you proud, but you've suffocated me with your expectations. I am my own man now, and I will choose my own path. I love Aminat, and I'm going to marry her. Madame Falak stood silent for a moment, her face expressionless. Then, with a sigh, she said, If this is the path you choose, and then so be it. But know this, you will never have my blessing. Adebayo felt a pang in his chest, but it was not guilt. It was sadness, the kind that came from realizing that a mother's love, no matter how powerful, could sometimes hold a person captive. He took a deep breath and spoke his final words. I understand, Mother, but I will not change my mind. The days following Adebayo's confrontation with his mother were the most difficult of his life. The air felt heavy with unspoken words, and despite his resolve to live for himself, he couldn't shake the feeling of loss. His mother, the woman who had shaped his entire existence, had turned her back on him, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. Though Adebayo had stood firm in his decision to marry Aminat, he could not ignore the ache in his chest, the ache that came from the realization that his mother might never fully accept his choice. He loved her, but he also knew that he could no longer live in the shadows of her expectations. Aminat, too, had her own struggles. Though she was relieved that Adebayo had chosen her, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy. Madame Folak's disapproval was still fresh in her mind, and she wondered if she would ever truly find a place in the family. Adebayo had promised that things would get better, that his mother would come around, but Aminat's heart was heavy. She had given so much of herself to Adebayo, and now she was not sure if she would ever be fully accepted into his world. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Adebayo and Aminat sat by the river, their fingers intertwined. The water flowed quietly, its steady current reflecting the calm that both of them desperately sought. Adebayo's thoughts were far away, his mind replaying the difficult conversation he had had with his mother. Despite his decision to choose his own life, the image of his mother's disappointed face haunted him. Adebayo, Aminat said softly, breaking the silence. How are you feeling? I know this hasn't been easy for you. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. I feel lost, Aminat. I thought everything would fall into place once I made my decision, but my mother's rejection, it's like I've lost a part of myself. I don't know how to fix this. Aminat squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone in this, Adebayo. We're in this together. I know it's hard, but you've made the right choice. You chose us, and that's what matters. We'll build a life together no matter what happens. Adebayo smiled weakly, grateful for her strength. But deep down, he knew that his relationship with his mother could not be fixed so easily. He had hurt her by defying her wishes, and no amount of love for Aminat would erase the pain of that betrayal. As the days passed, Adebayo's guilt began to eat away at him. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his mother's love, but he also knew that he had made the right decision. One evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, he decided that it was time to visit Madame Folak again. He arrived at her home, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. The familiar scent of her cooking wafted through the air, but this time there was no warmth in it. Madame Folak stood by the door, her expression unreadable. Adebayo stepped forward, his voice steady, but full of emotion. Mother, he began, I know I hurt you by choosing Aminat, but I need you to understand that I didn't make this choice lightly. I love you, and I will always honor the sacrifices you made for me. But I can't live my life according to your expectations anymore. I need to live for myself, and Aminat is a part of that. Madame Folake looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and something else, perhaps resignation. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than before. I know, Adebayo. I know you love her. I can see it in your eyes. But I wanted the best for you, just as I always have. I wanted you to be happy, but I didn't realize that I was keeping you from it. Adebayo's heart tightened as he saw the vulnerability in his mother's eyes. I didn't want to hurt you, Mother, but you've always been the center of my world. I just needed to make my own choices, to live my own life. Madame Folake stepped closer, her expression softening. I understand, my son. It's hard for me to let go, to let you make your own decisions. But I realize now that I've been holding on too tightly. You are no longer a child, Adebayo. You're a man, and you have a right to choose your own path. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment there was silence. Then, to Adebayo's surprise, Madame Folak reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. I can see the love in your heart, and if you believe Aminat is the one who will make you happy, then I will try, for your sake, to accept her. Adebayo's heart swelled with relief, but there was still a part of him that couldn't fully believe it. Thank you, Mother. I know this is difficult for you, but I promise I will always respect you, and I will never forget the sacrifices you made for me. Madame Folake nodded slowly, her eyes misty. I know, Adebayo, and I will always love you, no matter who you choose. That evening, Adebayo and Aminat stood together by the river once again, but this time the air felt lighter. Adebayo had made peace with his mother, and though there would still be challenges ahead, he knew that he had made the right decision. His relationship with Aminat was the beginning of something beautiful, a future they would build together, free from the past's heavy grip. The next day, as they prepared for their wedding, Adebayo received a message from his mother. She had sent her blessings, along with a simple note. You have my blessing, Adebayo. I want you to be happy. I'll be there on your wedding day. The words were simple, but they meant the world to Adebayo. He had feared that his mother would never truly accept Aminat, but this was a sign that she was willing to let go of her control and embrace the future that her son had chosen. On the day of the wedding, the village was alive with excitement. Adebayo stood at the altar, his heart racing as he waited for Aminat to arrive. When she walked down the aisle, her smile radiant and her eyes filled with love, Adebayo knew that all the struggles had been worth it. His mother was there, sitting in the front row, her face proud, yet filled with tears. Adebayo's heart swelled with emotion, knowing that despite everything, his family was coming together. The ceremony was simple, yet beautiful. As Adebayo and Aminat exchanged vows, they promised to stand by each other through every challenge that life would bring. The love they shared was not just about happiness, but about growth, sacrifice, and understanding. It was a love that had weathered storms, and now it would flourish in the light of a new beginning.